Hi, everyone. This Shabbat, we take a look at the story of Noah. And the story of Noah confronts us with some of the deepest and most disturbing questions facing humanity collectively. It confronts us with our inclination towards violence. It confronts us with our potential to wreak environmental devastation. And ultimately, it presents us with a view of human beings as organizing ourselves into hierarchies wherein we oppress each other. And the scholar I'd like to turn to offer some thoughts about the different dimensions of this story is the great Tikva Frymer-Kensky, who passed away in 2006. And Tikva Frymer-Kensky was a towering scholar of the Bible and the ancient Near East. And the way she understood this story and the Bible in general was to look at the plethora of goddesses and gods in the ancient Near East and how each one had their specific function, and the people would propitiate that particular god for that to get a particular result or outcome from nature. And then the revolution in the Hebrew Bible wasn't so much that the God of the Bible won out over these ancient Near Eastern gods, but rather the revolution was that the God of the Hebrew Bible subsumed all of these functions under one being. And that radically changed people's relationship to God, people's relationship to the collective of humanity, and people's relationship to nature. Now, there's a lot to say about it, but to really say it very succinctly, if I can. In the Bible, the understanding is God controls everything. And if God controls everything, that means nature is governed not just by the whim of God, but by a stable series of laws that God sets in motion. And if that is all taken care of, then people don't have to run around trying to propitiate the different gods for this and that outcome. They can live their lives, trust that nature will go on undisturbed, but with one condition, which is that they have to maintain a moral society and treat each other well, or else God will intervene and then disrupt the cycle of nature. And so the flood, the story of the flood begins not so much with God deciding to bring the flood, but rather with human violence reaching the breaking point at which God has no choice but to send the flood. It's almost like a chemical reaction or a nuclear reaction. The people and their corruption and their violence was the catalyst for this reaction of the flood. But the flood itself is a precursor to a more remarkable intervention, especially in the eyes of Tikva Frymer-Kensky, which is that after the flood, if you remember, God enters into a covenant with Noah and his family. Who's Noah's wife is another question that I'd love to explore. But God enters into this covenant with Noah and his family and with all of creation that's really designed to limit human bloodshed, and the Talmud expands on this to include the 7 mitzvot that are incumbent upon all humanity, that include courts and justice and people treating animals well and people treating each other well. But Frymer-Kensky sees this as an even more remarkable intervention because the Bible knew that in ancient Near Eastern societies there were laws, but the laws were written by people. Here God is giving the laws, and so they are supreme and transcendent in their morality, setting people on a moral pillar of a kind of universal sense of humanity and the obligations we have to each other. So unfortunately, everything goes downhill from there. After Noah enters into the covenant with God, and there's the sign with the rainbow. If you remember, Noah plants a vineyard. He gets drunk. He's lying out exposed and naked, and his son Ham humiliates him in some unspecified way. We don't know. It must have been horrible, because when Noah wakes up, he curses Ham as a punishment for that particular act. But then he goes further, and he curses all the descendants of Ham. And in that curse, he says that they should be subservient to the rest of humanity. Now, unfortunately, this trope has been basically plucked up by Western civilization. It has a shameful history. It's been used to justify slavery of African peoples. It's been used to justify colonization. It's been used to justify racism and genocide. And Tikva Frymer-Kensky asks the question that's on all our minds, which is, well, why is it here to begin with? If the Torah has the story in which creation is purged of all of its destructive actors and then is being reset on a new transcendent universal moral foundation, why does the Torah go there? And why does it reintroduce this hierarchy in human civilization? So I want to turn to Carol Oakes, the scholar Carol Oakes, for just a moment and offer an insight that she has. And she notes that in the entire story of Noah, Noah is silent. That perhaps, and I think I'm adding my own thing here, that perhaps that this silence is equated with Noah's being an ish tzaddik tamim, being a tzaddik, a righteous person, and tamim, a holy and pure righteous person. And of course, there's a problem with that in Jewish tradition. And then the second feature that she notes is that the first time Noah speaks, it's words of destruction and words of what she calls differentiated love, but which we can expand upon and call words of oppression, literally making the children of Ham subject to the rest of humanity. And what does this mean? Well, Carol Oakes says something very interesting. She notes that in the realm of people having complete moral agency in this world, we have these deeply powerful resources at our disposal, And the question is, how are we going to deploy them? Are we going to deploy them for healing, or are we going to deploy them for destruction? And so for me, there are 2 points that come out of this. One is that real devotion to humanity, devotion to God, is expressed through protest, through seeing the wrongs in this world and speaking up about them and galvanizing other people to do something about them. That seems to be part of the outcome from this insight. The other is that the true power that human beings have is not the power of domination, but it's the power of relationships and the power through those relationships to bring about justice and healing. And this accords with Tikva Frymer-Kensky's more global view of the theology and the role of humanity at this stage in the Bible. Because ultimately, the Bible is a gamble. There is this universal vision, but we don't know if it's actually going to work. And so God bets on this species that so far doesn't have a great track record. But the story doesn't end there. The story keeps going with the expectation that this people will grow in their wisdom, in their understanding, and their ability to put these principles of justice and relationship and healing into practice. So it's a grand transcendent moral vision. And what Tikva Frymer-Kensky says is that throughout the Bible, we wait to see if human beings are worthy of this transcendent moral vision. And with that, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for tuning in, and seeing you next week.